All good? All right. Hello. Thank you for sticking around and not running away because of the AV problems. So this presentation, even though it wasn't on the website or anywhere else because I couldn't remember which one I was giving until last night, is called Hackers, Hugs, and Drugs, Mental Health and InfoSec. And I thought I'd start it off with a little story first. So about 7 years ago, I was married, 2 kids at the time, now I have 3, living in a super shitty house in the middle of nowhere in northern Ohio. My youngest son was about 1, my oldest at the time was 7. Our roof leaked. The guy I was married to at the time was just a complete and utter slob. And without getting into a lot of detail of my marriage, because that's, a whole other story that I'd rather not have recorded, I didn't really have a whole lot of control over my life or anything that happened. So that being said, I remember the night that I realized something was wrong with me, or at least kind of, that I didn't already know. I was in the shower, and when I got out, I just burst into tears and couldn't stop crying, couldn't talk, and that right there, well, I don't know if it's playing. Yeah, that's the best visual representation I can manage of how I felt at the time. Yeah, I still feel like that sometimes, definitely. So it felt like the world was ending. There was nothing I could do to stop it. My whole mind was static. I couldn't, physically say any of that at the time. And I hate to use the word triggered ever, but I finally realized what had triggered it was that my shower curtain was dirty. The stupidest thing in the whole world, but at the time, that's just kind of what, tripped it over the edge. So I felt super stupid and immature at the time. Looking back at a lot of it now, a lot of the anxiety problems that I had were just due to things being unorderly and uncleanly at the time. That itself is a whole other book of stories that I can talk about. But the funny thing is, when I realized something was wrong internally, I still didn't ask for help. I thought I could just handle everything on my own. I was a strong, independent 25-year-old that had, gone through everything I was ever going to go through in life, so I could totally handle this just like I handled everything else. So why in the world am I bringing this up at a HackerCon? Because a lot of you, I consider my family. This has been the first group of people in a long time that kind of understand a lot of the same problems I was going through. When I began tweeting and posting on Facebook and stuff like that, I had a lot of other people reach out to me that they were having the same kind of problems, whether it was anxiety, depression, bipolar, you name it. There was a whole bunch of different things that they were going through as well. And they were trying to tackle it alone like I did for at least 10 years or so, since a little bit before I had my first son. So I had some amazing conversations with some people. They're super smart, personable people that you would never think anything was wrong with them, because they're the first ones to crack jokes, so, always super pleasant. They're never going to let you see that side of them. So I wanted to continue this conversation that I had started online in public, so it takes a little bit of the stigma away from what a lot of people think is out there. So we never want to admit anything's wrong with us, right? So what's the first step of any 12-step program? If anybody's ever been through any. Acceptance is usually one of the first steps, but you can't just accept it and stop there. If you do, it's just going to make you more depressed and angry that you know that it's there and there's nothing that you can do about it. And not only do people in our industry have the normal stresses of everyday life, like family, relationships, jobs, money, all that kind of stuff, but we have, with a couple other types of careers that I can think of, we have a little bit more stress on top of that. Some people do IR for the police, or looking into child pornography cases, or, a lot of things that will really just fuck with your mental state that will also kind of add on to that anxiety. And not only is this our job, but this is our passion. This is why we're here. We put more time into it than we do pretty much anything else, right? Because we're, it's our 9 to 5 or 8 to 8 job sometimes. And we also come here. We spend our weekends with people that we like, doing something that we're super passionate about. We spend time on research, learning, teaching. And when you combine all of that pressure and stress together, we also take it from our bosses, our significant others, whatever. It just kind of starts to build up. And I think the majority of roles that we fill kind of cater to our willingness to want to just sit behind a computer screen and not to ever talk to anybody, which also kind of lends to that problem. So let's talk about some of the research I did next. When I first thought about talking about this topic, I went to Google, and the first search term I looked up was mental health issues in STEM field. And most were about women. But, most people in STEM aren't women. So when I took the women out of the search term, it went from 6 million responses down to 2 million. So a lot of it, I think we're focusing on women's mental health issues, and it's definitely not just women. I know that for sure. Women are different in regards to mental health. You're more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety or depression, while men tend towards substance abuse or like antisocial disorders.
We're all shit.
Right. But nobody wants to talk about the men, and you guys don't want to talk about yourselves either. So that's why I'm up here. So the hypothesis I was trying to prove is that it seems like people in STEM have a higher rate of mental health issues than other types of careers. So it turns out there's a couple studies that provide evidence to that. There's one called the Savannah IQ interaction hypothesis. It states the finding of an association between progressively increasing risk of bipolar disorder and high arithmetic intellectual performance is rather surprising. They went on to explain that an arithmetic test requires not only mathematical skill, but rapid information processing for the purpose of successfully completing a timed exam. Higher scores with that rapid processing power may also share a tendency to experience a state of mania or high focus or high psychomotor activity. So there's actually a study that they did to prove the fact that people with higher IQs tend to have more antisocial or mania type behavior. It also, that Savannah IQ hypothesis also talks about people with higher intelligence tending to self-medicate with alcohol and drugs more than the average person. So it kind of shows how much research the people of Mr. Robot put into it, because, without any spoilers or anything, the character Elliot suffers from social anxiety disorder, depression, delusions, paranoia, and he self-medicates with morphine. And then he uses something called Suboxone to deal with any withdrawals that he might be having. So I don't recommend doing that at all. But the gist is, it kind of goes along with a good part of what this paper was about. So let's move on to some more statistics. So not only the Savannah IQ interaction hypothesis talks about the whole smarts to depression correlation, there was a study done at Berkeley that found between 42 and 48 of the Berkeley PhD students in science and engineering are depressed. That's compared to 7% of the average population. So it's a huge disparity between that and the average Joe. So that makes sense on the Google results. That's really the Google results that I had found. So it's not like you guys aren't having issues. You're just not reporting them. 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. Experience some kind of mental illness in the given year. And all of this, and we still think that everybody has it together better than we do. I know I'm guilty of it daily. A handful of people have already given talks about like InfoSec burnout and that kind of stuff, which also kind of correlates with this. Imposter syndrome, which also correlates. And that can go hand in hand with a good amount of mental health problems that we have. Imposter syndrome is the feeling that you really shouldn't be doing what you're doing because you don't have the time put in, you don't have the knowledge required, any of that kind of stuff. It's the feeling that other people have it, deserve it more than you do or have it more together than you do. A lot of times that's how we see ourselves when we think of suicide or when we are having anxiety attacks. You feel like you're drowning while everybody else has their shit together. So I know I can think of a good amount of people that have talked me through situations like this, and all the times that I've been limited because of, when my brain wants to go in some crazy direction. I also found that the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force recommends that all adults be screened for depression, which kind of amazed me. That's astounding to think of. When I read that, my mind went in a million different directions, like everybody or just U.S. citizens? Is it because of first world problems? Is it because of our diet, government, whatever? In the grand scheme of things, we don't really have things that bad. If you look, outside of our little bubble. But it doesn't matter. None of that matters when you're like huddled in a corner, unable to move. So I'm going to dive into the different types of mental health disorders, and I'm definitely going to have to read some of like the characteristics off my screen because I can't remember. There's a whole lot of them. We're not going to cover everything. That'll take all day. There's a lot of different mental health problems out there that are possible. I'll just cover some of the more common ones that we see. When I talk about the symptoms of these, pay attention. They don't just include the shit that goes inside your brain, but there's also a lot of physical problems that manifest themselves as well. So first, there's social anxiety disorder. I think probably 90% of us have this, or at least it seems so sometimes. Some common symptoms are fear of situations in which you may be judged, worrying about embarrassing or humiliating yourself, and concern that you'll offend somebody. They also have intense fear of interacting or talking with strangers, fear of physical symptoms that might cause you embarrassment, like blushing, sweating, trembling, having a shaky voice. Things like avoiding doing things or speaking to people because of fear of embarrassment. You avoid situations where you might be the center of attention, like standing up on stage, so I never know how I get up here every time. You can have anxiety in anticipation of an event that you've signed up for. Spending time, I do this one a lot, after a social situation, constantly analyzing your performance and conversations that you had over and over and over, and identifying flaws in those interactions. And expecting the worst possible consequences from a negative experience in a social setting. So you might say to yourself that these type of things happen every now and then, but a lot of these mental health issues, it's when it happens more than not. It specifies their intense fears, not just, I kind of don't like that. They're intense fears that manifest themselves and you think about constantly. So I know I'm not a doctor, but if you experience any of this or the stuff I'm going to talk about, and you haven't gotten help, I'll talk about how to do that later too. Other things about anxiety, you might avoid things like going to public restrooms, eating in public. I had a friend that would go out and eat in her car every day at lunch because she couldn't stand the thought of anybody watching her chew. So she was never able to eat in public anywhere. Interacting with strangers, making eye contact directly with anybody that you're speaking to, initiating conversations. Dating is very hard when you have issues with social anxiety. Going to work or school, entering a room in which people are already seated. Like if you if someone were to come in here and say, oh my God, she's already started, and they just nope out, they're out of here. They're not going to come in and sit down because of the fear of attention being drawn to them as they come in. I don't know how many relationships I've ruined because of anxiety and panic attacks. And I don't just mean like romantic relationships. I mean friendships, business relationships, all that kind of stuff. Anything that's more than just a strictly business relationship. I'll overinvest myself in a relationship and then kind of just start pushing people away because in my head it's already over and I've already fucked things up. I'm either being too needy, not needy enough, my jokes are stupid, you name it. And again, this is just me talking. People have different levels of anxiety that they have to deal with and different symptoms and experiences that they've had. But a huge common theme is overthinking and being around people. So next up is a super fun one, is bipolar disorder. I know a handful of people that also struggle with this. And there's two sides of this one. First is the manic part. Some of the symptoms are abnormally upbeat, jumpy, wired, increased activity, energy, agitation, an exaggerated sense of well-being and self-confidence. You'll have a decreased need for sleep, unusual talkativeness, racing thoughts, distractibility. A big one's poor decision making. For example, going on buying sprees, taking sexual risks, making foolish investments with your money. And the second part of bipolar are the characteristics for average depression. So depressed mood, losing interest in all the things that you once held interest in, all the activities and everything that you were doing, you just stopped going to, lots of sleeping, significant weight loss or weight gain, decreased or increase in appetite, that kind of stuff. Fatigue, loss of energy, thinking about or planning suicide. And then we come to borderline personality disorder. It's a mental health disorder that impacts the way you think about yourself and others. It causes problems with functioning in everyday life. So it includes a pattern of unstable relationships, a distorted self-image, extreme emotions and impulse control problems. People with personality disorder will have an intense fear of abandonment, which will really cause issues in any type of relationship. And they'll go to extreme measures to avoid that kind of separation or rejection. They might idolize someone one moment and then suddenly think they're out to get them the next. Rapid changes in self-identity and self-images that include shifting goals and values and either seeing yourself as you don't exist or that you're a bad person. There's periods of stress-related paranoia, a loss of contact with reality, lasting from a few minutes to a few hours. Lots of impulse and risky behavior, gambling, reckless driving, unsafe sex, spending sprees, binge eating, drug abuse, all of the bad things that you probably shouldn't be doing. Suicidal thoughts, which is a common theme throughout lots of mental health. Inappropriate or intense anger also. Depression, that's definitely one of the most talked about mental health issues out there. A lot of people will associate this with just being sad about something in particular as opposed to being depressed, but it's way more than that. According to a recent WHO study, depression is the leading cause of physical illness in the world. And a lot of us already know what some of the symptoms for depression are: sadness, tearfulness, emptiness, hopelessness, angry outbursts, loss of interest, frustration, either insomnia or sleeping too much. Tiredness, lack of energy, I talked about all these already. Slowed thinking, speaking or body movements, which is another physical manifestation. Feelings of worthlessness or guilt, fixating on past failures. So it's great when depression's mixed with anxiety because you're just constantly thinking about how horrible of a person you are all the time. You have problems thinking, making decisions. and unexplained physical problems like back pain or headaches. And then I think this is the last one I cover. See, this and one more, this might be the last one. PTSD. So it's a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event. A lot of times it's associated with active combat in the military. It could also be rape or some kind of physical abuse can cause PTSD. And then you have recurring unwanted memories, dreams, whatever of that traumatic event. Flashbacks, like you're reliving it. Severe emotional distress or physical reactions that might remind you of the traumatic event. Okay, I do have one more. Obsessive compulsive disorder is a pattern of unreasonable thoughts and fears, which are the obsessions, that lead you to do repetitive behaviors, which are the compulsions. So common things are fear of contamination and dirt, needing things orderly and asymmetrical, aggressive or horrific thoughts about harming yourselves or others if those two things can't happen, or a variety of other things. Unwanted thoughts including aggression or on sexual or religious topics. Is that going? There we go. So all of these suck. When I was looking up OCD type stuff, there are some really, really severe OCD stories from some pretty popular people. If you look up any of the OCD that Nikola Tesla had, it was amazing to read some of it. Like he had this compulsion where he couldn't really talk to women or anything to do with women. He also had an obsession of I think it was triangle shapes, maybe. He had to, I think it was like circle the block 3 times before he entered a building. Like super weird OCD problems. If you look for, intense OCD stories out there, there's a lot of really crazy things. So, I mean, there's definitely different levels. People can have just OCD about one certain thing, or they can have, all the way up to that kind of stuff. So, now what? What do you do if you or someone you care about is experiencing one or hopefully not all of these? How do you cope, or how do you help them cope? I had put out an impromptu survey online a while back about 20 different questions on people's perception of mental health problems. And several of the survey responses pointed out that, one, I messed up the question formats. But the question was, or one of the questions was, do you participate in any activities to reduce, dull, or improve the stress or feelings that you're having, like alcohol, prescription drugs, other drugs, exercise, medication, or other? As pointed out that I should have made that a select many, not just a multiple choice, because some people, try and cope with all of that, right? I got 860 responses. Some of my favorite out of the other category, because you could do a write-in answer kind of. My favorite responses out of how to deal with stress were pretend to be a Vulcan, masturbation, which I should have just added, cats, and Twitter. So, yeah. There's a lot of different coping and relaxation methods out there that can help with that kind of stuff, including medicine, prescribed or not. And here you see the results of kind of that earlier hypothesis where a lot of us will self-medicate. I actually went and reached out to, he reached out to me when he saw the survey, but one of my friends does a lot of mental health counseling, and so I had sent him all my notes and all the research I had done and all my thoughts on it, and kind of got, some of his feedback as well. And one of the things that he said was the quickest way to improve your brain chemistry is moving around. And the 2 best ways to improve the chemicals in your brain without drugs are what? You think of the 2 top things on how to improve your brain chemistry.
Caffeine?
Nope.
Exercise.
Exercise is one of them, and the other one is kind of exercise. No, sex. So as long as you're doing it right. So I use my mom as a sounding board for a lot of this kind of stuff, which is great because I like making her laugh and shake her head at me when she looks at all of the images that I find online. When I started talking about different coping mechanisms, using drugs, seeking counselors, psychiatrists, that kind of stuff, she mentioned her great-grandma, which she had been institutionalized because of her sad and withdrawn behavior through menopause. And for treatment at the time, she was just given regular shock therapy. It's nothing like trying to get yourself out of clinical depression and shocking the hell out of you all the time. But now we have better options. People talk sarcastically about safe spaces when making fun of millennials, but I can think that we agree that most people don't need safe spaces, but it would be nice to have somebody to talk to if needed. Even if you don't use anything as a coping mechanism, sometimes it feels good to externalize those feelings and thoughts that you're having in your head. A lot of times I'll just write in general and pitch it when I'm done being crazy. And it's nice to have somebody to talk to without being judged and mocked. Back then, you couldn't really talk about mental health issues at all. It was a way bigger stigma than it was today. Just like you couldn't talk about teen pregnancy, divorce, and yay, I've had all three. So not only you can talk to people in your field about your thoughts, you can talk to them about your feelings, your research, what you do day to day, and really anything else that you can want to, but a lot of people want professional opinions too. So psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, that kind of stuff that will not only listen to you, but they'll also help you work through any of the issues that you might be having. If you need medication down the line, that as well. Finding a good therapist can be hard sometimes. Maybe you'll go to one and find that you don't really click with them. I've had people actually do Skype therapy sessions with people that they actually find that they click with, because they could be, all the way across the world, and you don't want to have to try and find a way to get to them if it's somebody that you actually click with. So getting back to All Doped Up. In the last 20 years, they've seen a 400% increase in the use of antidepressants. And that's an estimated 1 in 10 adults now taking them. I'm one of them. So while we don't want to devalue people suffering, we don't want to be quick to throw pills at problems either, when they could just deal with, one of those other coping mechanisms that I talked about. So it's great that people are meditating, exercising, relieving stress in other ways, hacking, learning, whatever you want to do. And a lot of those things can increase your dopamine levels as well. When I was first prescribed Zoloft, this is the kind of explanation that I was given, that it was just a simple chemical reaction that was going to change the way that my brain dealt with stuff, right? There was some kind of chemical in my brain that wasn't exactly working great, and Zoloft would fix it. He said it should be pumped into the water supply and given to everybody, which I definitely don't think is a good idea after dealing with it for several months. But I took that as gospel, right? Because my doctor sat me down and he told me, this is what you need, and this is great, and this is the simple explanation for it. Because logically, on the surface, that made sense. Something isn't firing right, and I need something, like that to fix a biological issue. During my research, I found out that that's not necessarily 100% true. And what I found in medical journals, they have no clue why some of these drugs work. Which, all right, I get that science is hard. The study also kind of pointed out that these issues also arise from things like faulty mood regulation by your brain, genetic vulnerability, stressful life events, other medications, other medical problems. There's a American Psychological Association article that I like, that I had found. They said, we do not dispute the possibility that neurotransmitters and other brain chemicals play a significant role in the etiology of depression. However, we are also concerned that the chemical imbalance explained may not reflect the full range of causes of depression, may be given greater credence by both consumers and practitioners than is supported by sound research, and may be understood in an overly simplistic manner, which is completely what happened in between me and my doctor. But really, what part of any medical science is not something that we receive in an overly simplistic manner? They're not going to tell you, oh, we're not sure why this works, we're just going to try it, because that's not what you want to hear when you're in there. So I started taking Zoloft about 6 months before the end of my marriage, and it was amazing. I wasn't sad anymore, but honestly, I had a lot more energy, but honestly, I wasn't really feeling anything. I wasn't sad, but I also had zero emotions. Pretty much a zombie inside, dead to the world. I couldn't give a fuck about anything. It was great to deal with all of that stress at once, but probably not great in the long term. Yeah, I'll skip about that part. It's going back to, has anybody ever watched The Magicians? Alright, then never mind. So after all those major stresses in my life had died down, I thought it might be good to actually feel some emotions again, instead of just trying to fill that hole in my life with all of the horrible things that I was for those couple years. But it takes a little bit of self-reflection to realize that you could be going down a bad path, and start, make a change to go down a better one. So I was on Zoloft, and then I changed to something called Wellbutrin, and then the occasional Xanax, which really helps sometimes, and for me has worked out. It definitely does not work for everybody. I know a handful of other people that are on a handful of other kind of medications that all have different side effects, all have different levels of how they work, and how long they work, and how often, all that kind of stuff. But honestly, going through that kind of stuff is probably better than, all of the other super unhealthy ways that you could cope with it. So now that we've covered a whole bunch of my personal baggage and coping mechanisms, we're going to look at how we can treat others if it's not just you suffering, if it's somebody that you love or somebody that you care about suffering. And looking at some of the communication is like, and some of the resources that I've found that might help. So since I tried to start talking about this kind of stuff openly, the responses I've got from people is this kind of stuff. So now that I can tell I have an anxiety attack, I kind of can verbalize it more than I used to. And the two most common negative things that I've heard, one is people tell me that I'm overreacting, and I'm definitely not the only one that happens to for sure. I've been super surprised at all the other people that have told me that. It was a common reaction. And I get this a lot too. Just that I have so much going for me. How could I ever be sad about, I have a great job, I get paid great, I have great kids, a great house, how could I ever be sad because I have all of this kind of stuff going for me? But I've caught myself saying the exact same thing to other people when they tell me they're depressed, or at least thinking the same thing, right? It's nice to hear, I love you, you're amazing, that kind of stuff, but it's nice to hear, but it doesn't really help at all at the time. Or another thing, maybe try thinking happier thoughts, and we know that never works. So I only wish that were possible. You can't just will yourself to especially when you might have a chemical imbalance in your brain, to stop doing that. It's not going to work. It can be really easy to put the happy face on the outside, and it just doesn't mean your, inside problems go away. A good amount of mental health issues, like I said, come with their own physical symptoms, even if it's difficult for the everyday person to see. Even sometimes we can't see or we can't correlate that ourselves. You can't just tell someone to make more of an effort, and I feel like if we treated it like we do physical problems, it might be a little bit better. So here are some of the do-says. Sometimes you just have to listen. If it's somebody that's close to you, knowing what they need or consistently need is a kind of conversation that needs to happen as well. Each individual person is going to have something else that works for them. A thing that I've done is I've given people keywords, it's like a safe word, but for your mental health. Mine happen a lot at conferences, especially if I have lack of sleep, shitty diet, no exercise. Day to day, I sit at home alone with a cat. I don't talk to anybody. And then I come to a conference and I'm surrounded by hundreds of people all at once. And it just completely flips me out. I used to forget to take all of my vitamins and pills too when I travel, and I've stopped making that mistake, because boy, does that help when you actually, can stick to the stuff that you're supposed to be on. And another thing you have to understand about interacting with others is they might just not want to go out. They might not want to go do anything. The thought of being in crowds and closed spaces with loud noises, whatever. And I find that to be true no matter what the issue is. Being crazy can take a huge toll on your social life. There's a great article that a friend of mine sent me called "This is How You Love Someone with Anxiety." A lot of the points were spot on. And it was, especially for both of us, but it was different with what with what we both experienced in our life. And my favorite quote from it is, "Silence kills anyone with anxiety. It creates problems in their mind that aren't even there. It ends in apologies that aren't needed." I do apologize a lot. That part pretty much describes me to a T. I can make up some hugely wild speculations if I text somebody and they don't text back, which isn't a crazy chick thing. It's with anybody. It would happen all the time at my job. I would think I was doing a horrible job and I was going to get fired every day because I never got a response to the email that I sent out. Another one is the phrase is, "It's okay," or "How can I help?" That can never be used enough. And nothing beats a blanket for it. Not only have I gotten both the positive and negative stories about other people having mental health, but almost everyone I know and have talked to over the last couple of years have surprised me and surprised others every time they've brought up their mental health with others. In a few cases, a lot of them will just think it's their fault, or they've been shamed into them thinking it's their fault. Not only is it difficult to talk about at the beginning, but a lot of other things come into play that make you want to bottle it up and force it inside to go away. And there's a little video that I want to show you next. There's a website called iRonin that Jason Street put together. It has a lot of mental health mental health coping things and talks and articles and kind of resources that you can use. It's ir0nin.com, and he put that together. And it's also good for if you're just getting into InfoSec. He has a lot of information on there too for that. And I hope my audio works, because this is Mubix. Great guy. Highly recommend watching any of his stuff. Great friend, and he came out with this thing about the same time I was making this talk, which kind of goes along some of the same topics. Maybe. Man.
Here.
There.
Now, every single one of you watching probably has a different definition of what that might be. But I guarantee not a single one of those definitions includes race, creed, color, religion, sexual preference, or anything in between. The hacker community is filled with human beings, people from all walks of life. In our community, like any social community, there are people among us, friends, acquaintances, con buddies that have problems that many of you might not even know they have. We have lost too many of those friends to suicide, drugs, alcohol, depression, and crime. Many of us dove into the world of computers and the internet because it was a place of acceptance. But there's a dark side to this world. It is too easy to disconnect, to miss those markers when all you see is what someone tweets or IMs. You can't see when you hurt, when you cry. There are many ways to help us that need it and are afraid to ask, because one of the biggest biases we still have in our community is showing weakness. But you can let those around you know you care, that you are there for them, and the door is open to talk anytime. But one of the best ways is just to be around each other. Hang out, go to a movie, have a good time, talk about your day. Be a true friend, not just another face in the lobby of a conference. If you wish to join me in this fight, please make a video. Or just tell your friends, your con buddies, or your acquaintances that you just see at that LobbyCon that we are all hacking together.
Sweet. I love that video. So my door, my phone, my DMs are always open to talk about anything that's on your mind. There's now specifically a Slack channel for people that want to just like bitch about them being crazy. And I have, those links too if you want them. Let's see here. I'm going to skip through this for the sake of time because none of that's really important. These are some really good nationwide resources if you need them. Some of them you can even like text or chat with online, which is great, especially, if you don't like talking to people on the phone like I do. And then I definitely wanted to finish up with a picture of a puppy because I was told this is a very downer of a talk. But you're definitely not alone. Get help if you need it, and just reach out to people. That's it.